Hey, everybody. Julio Ricardo Varela, founder of Latino Rebels, part of Futuro Media. And if you're a fan of Latino Rebels Radio Live, we've been doing this show. We did it during the pandemic. We did it in the summer. We used to do it at 10 o'clock at night. And then we were like, we're going to take a break because we're in the middle of doing some new ideas, new concepts for a show that I announced earlier that you'll learn more about. And then all of a sudden, we decided to go one night only like Dreamgirls right before the election. So it's Latino Rebels Radio Live, one night only. You see, I could break out into Dreamgirls, but I'm not going to. And the reason why is that we wanted to focus on new research by the Walton Family Foundation, who is supporting the show tonight, about Gen Z and millennials and the American dream and the minds of young people. And there's this new research that came out, and it's really, really fascinating. And I am so lucky that we have the researcher with me, Kristen Solis Anderson of Echelon Insights from DC. Let's bring her in so we can get into this research. Hello. How are you?
Hi there. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
You've been busy. I saw your Twitter feed today. We're not going to talk presidential politics. You're going to take a break. You're actually going to talk about the work. Exactly. Because it's like, you're a pollster. We're not doing that. We're actually talking about the work that you just did that came out that I found to be super fascinating. Do you want to break down what you were doing with Walton about Gen Z and millennials and what the survey is all about?
Sure. So about a decade ago, I got really into studying the millennial generation because I am a millennial. And I found that there were a lot of assumptions about millennials that struck me as pretty wrong. That you'd read these headlines that would say things like millennials are all fragile, or they're all snowflakes, or they're always complaining. And I just thought none of this seems right. So I've spent the last decade studying my generation. And then, of course, Generation Z is now on the scene. Millennials, right. I wish we were still the kids these days, but we're young.
No, my kid anymore. Is the kid. Yeah, Gen Z is the new thing. My kid is a Gen Zer, so both of them. So yes. So you keep doing it. Yes. So.
And so there's a real interest in understanding what do Gen Z and millennial folks think about their own future. So if you read the headlines, I mean, gosh, the millennial generation has grown up in the shadow of 9/11, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, financial crisis, you name it. And a lot of folks say, when you ask them, do you think the next generation will be better or worse off? They say, oh, worse off. How are they ever going to be able to start families and buy homes? And they're in such trouble. And so we did this study to find out, is that how millennials and Gen Zers see themselves? Do they think they themselves are going to struggle to succeed, or do they think they'll be able to overcome the stuff that's been thrown at them? So that's why we went ahead to pursue this research project.
Right. And it's about 4,000, right? The sample size is pretty robust. I mean, this is not an internet poll. This is not a social media poll. This is not a subsample of a subsample of a subsample, which I'm like, I've been covering Latino polling for the last 3 weeks, and I'm like, can I just get a poll that has 1,000 Latinos in a poll, please? So I can, so this is a pretty robust sample. We're talking about 4,000, right? A total of, and what was the most surprising thing that you found?
I think in some ways I was surprised a little bit by the optimism that we found. Again, if you look at the headlines, it's all stuff about millennials will never buy houses because they're spending too much money on avocado toast. And yet you wind up reading in this study and you find out that 8 in 10 millennials and Gen Zers think that if they work hard, they'll be able to get ahead. 7 in 10 think they'll be able to move up in the economic ladder. 2/3 believe that they will be able to achieve the American dream. And the thing that made me the happiest about that is that finding held true across racial and ethnic lines. The American dream was not just something that one type of millennial or Gen Zer thought they had access to. And that to me was really exciting news.
So what is the American dream? Like, did you define that in the research? Like, what is that? Because with my audience, like you say that sometimes and people go like, whoa, like, what does that mean? Especially with like Black and brown communities, because, and the research does, and we're going to bring guests that talk about it, but like this notion of, we pulled up a slide right here. It's like, 59% of Black respondents, Latino respondents, 57% are like that Gen Zers and millennials of color are more likely than whites in their generations to think that they will have a better life. So what is that? Like, what is the American dream? Like in their eyes is my question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think in past generations, the American dream has either been defined very narrowly as the white picket fence, the 2-car garage, and so on and so forth. And what we heard in our research is that is not how millennials or Gen Zers define it for themselves. If you ask them,
Right.
Google a picture that comes up when you think of the American dream, that might be what they think is going to come up on Google, but it's not how they think of it. But interestingly, it's also less about their relative position. So the American dream is not necessarily even about, am I better than my parents? Or am I better than someone else? Or am I better than I was yesterday? It's about, am I able to build the life I want for myself? Can I choose my own adventure? And I think that's pretty cool, that the idea that it's more about, look, we're so used to being able to customize so many things about our lives, and things like the walls between, our jobs and our personal identities, that's fallen down. We want our jobs to reflect our values and that with all of these walls coming down, young Americans really badly want to make sure that they are able to craft the future that they want for themselves.
Yeah, no. So this is what, we did. Welcome to live streaming. Like, what's the difference? What makes the resilience? Because when we hear about the older generation compared to the younger generation, like, why do you think? Because this optimism thing is like, it's kind of blowing me away. Like, as a Gen Xer, I'm inherently cynical, right? So so where do you see that difference between the older generation and newer generations? Like, why the optimism? Because I feel like that was the part where I was like, what?
Yeah. So part of our study, we wound up doing these things called qual boards, where you talk to people in depth over the course of a couple of days. And after we got the survey results back, I wanted to understand this more as well. And what we heard was not, oh, everything's going to be a breeze and everything's fine and there are no barriers in my way. Like, quite the opposite. In our survey, we found 4 in 10 think higher education is too expensive or hard to access. 6 in 10 Black millennials and Gen Zers say racial inequality is going to be a very or extremely big problem confronting them. So there are tons of things in our survey that show millennials and Gen Zers very aware of the barriers that stand in their way, but they also are confident in their own ability to overcome them. So instead of this vision of young people as snowflakes or weak, or it's quite the opposite. They believe they are adaptable. So for millennials in particular, they believe they are adaptable, pragmatic, that they've basically had to confront a lot of nonsense and they've just put their heads down and powered through. Like, we will be entrepreneurs and we will come up with a solution and we will get past this problem and we will fix things for ourselves. And for Generation Z, it's a little bit different. For them, it's we're going to use our voices and we're going to bring about change so that these obstacles will go away, because we're going to be in charge and we're going to make sure these obstacles don't exist anymore.
That sounds like my house with my daughter. So like, that's my, you have the quantitative, that's the qualitative, but do you think do you think a word like resilience in this sense of a generation, is it overused? I mean, I think, like, you do look at the last 20 years. They haven't been, kids growing up in times of, it seems like every moment, and now we're in the middle of, like, racial reckoning, a pandemic, and here we go again. And there's, Gen Zers who are not even, they're like 18, 19, 20 years, they're going through all this. Is resilience too much of, is it an overused word for this?
I don't know that it's an overused word. I think it's just a piece of the picture, though, because resilience alone is, there are problems, but we're just going to survive them, instead of there are problems and we are going to work to eliminate them so that future generations don't have to deal with them. In our research, we found, for instance, the environment is a huge piece of this. We found that even though there are a lot of things that young voters think are getting better, they think that the environment is going to be worse for them. And so they're really focused on, how can we make sure that doesn't happen, that doesn't come to pass, that we, just being resilient against a declining environment is not the goal. The goal is, how do we stop bad things and turn them around and get better? So that's where I think a lot of this is headed.
So where can people get all this research? Because I know we shared a couple of slides. We'll link to it when we do, like, the post show, and we'll probably put this up on our podcast. Like, I've just decided now to create a podcast of this. We'll take the audio. So where can people find all this so that they can learn more about this research, Kristen?
You can find the full report at the Walton Family Foundation's website. I believe it's waltonfamilyfoundation.org. You can also find it at my firm. We have it posted on our Twitter feed at Echelon Insights.
And speaking of Twitter feeds, your handle's down there, and I celebrated my 12 years on Twitter today, And so I can say this I feel like I'm a Twitter expert. You have excellent Twitter game. So I'm very happy that we've connected. Yes, no, don't change your Twitter voice.
Okay,
Kristen Sultan, thank you so much for being on Latino Rebels Radio Live tonight. Thank you so much.
Of course.
So that was Kristen Soltis Anderson, and just breaking down a little bit of the research. And again, we'll probably link to it in the comments. Add your comments. This is now thanks to the Walton Family Foundation. You're watching us on Latino Rebels. You're watching us on Latino USA. You're watching us on In the Thick, Futuro Media. Our friends at Now This said they'll share some of this, and on Twitter and Facebook. So hello, everybody. And if you're a fan of Latino Rebels Radio Live, when we were doing it in the summer, you would know that this wasn't solo. I don't do this solo. So I got to introduce, you know her from Orange is the New Black, Little America. You know her from her Instagram videos where she's roller skating, the fabulous Melinna Bobadilla from the West Coast, the best coast. Go Dodgers. I know I did. You're fine. We lost you for a second. So go Dodgers. How are you, Melinna? Dodgers. Let me get you that audio again.
Can we just say that it's so rewarding to hear you, a Bostonian, say go Dodgers? Like, I just want to simmer in that, you know?
I love Mookie Betts. There's no other way around it.
Man. Like, I appreciate an athlete that will speak to racial justice. So
there you go. So listen, we haven't seen each other. We've talked, but we have not done a show together since June.
I know.
And to quote Dreamgirls, pre-election, one night only. Right now,
one night only.
So
Dreamgirls will never leave you.
So it's good to see you, and we're gonna kick this off with I'm so excited to have this guest because I texted her through a friend on Monday and I said, please come on our show. Please come on our show. And she's like, I'm a fan of you too, Latino Rebels. And I was like, Natasha Alford, VP of theGrio digital content. Oh, is she on? Natasha, I'm so excited that you're on. Yay. Hello. Natasha is also a co-host of the Dear Culture podcast. Natasha, welcome to Latino Rebels Radio Live.
What's up, Latino Rebels family? How's it going? It's good to see you.
I love it. Natasha. She totally. So listen, the way we want to break this down, we wanted to show this research. We wanted to bring in different voices who kind of speak to this generation across different platforms, and especially you. I wanted to have you on because you know your stuff, and you're like me. It's like you see research and you're like, I don't know. So let me ask you, talking about this, because I'm kind of stuck on the whole notion of the American dream and American ideals, and especially in 2020 with the younger generation. And I really appreciate Kristen understanding, like, there's narratives, and then this is what the research is saying. But my question in this moment of racial reckoning, right? When you see young Black and Latinx, Gen Zers and Millennials, are they holding American ideals accountable? Is the American dream to them like because I feel like, what is the American dream first? And are these, are we changing it as we speak? Would love to hear your thoughts. I'm like totally breaking it down and geeking out here.
Well, I'm so happy to be here. It's great to see you both. What's up to everybody, wherever you're tuning in from? I love this question. And I think that really it depends on where you sit in America, right? Because Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. always talked about us having two Americas. And I think that we have to acknowledge that the American dream and the American experience is not the same for all. Right. My grandmother came from Puerto Rico to New York City in the 50s, and she worked at a bacon factory. Like, that was how she went after her American dream. And, on my father's side, they came from South Carolina and Mims, Florida, and went to the North to work in, steel factories because they were looking for the American dream. And so, what started as opportunities for so many families like mine, is still a nightmare for many families, right? I think about the fact that home ownership rates for Black people are the lowest that they've been in decades. Think about that. We're going backwards. Okay, so, for a generation before, maybe if you were born in the 50s or 60s, you would have a house. by now, by the time you hit the age that I'm at. And I'm not a homeowner. And there are a lot of other millennials who are not homeowners. And it's not the prospects of getting a home are harder for us because, there's racism in terms of lending. We tend to pay higher taxes, property taxes when you are Black in this country. We think about Latinos and, being denied credit or not really having a lot of credit. So I'm torn because I get the optimism. Yeah, hell yeah.
Me too.
That's why we're here.
I really, like I said, before I turn it over, because I really, really appreciated when I looked at the research and when we decided to do the show, as a journalist, I'm infinitely curious, right? You want to look at, right? And so, but then you start asking the questions, right? About like what it is. So I didn't want to cut you off and then I'll turn it over to Melinna, but what are your final thoughts? Because this notion of holding American ideas accountable, which is a great question from my producer, Harsha Nahata from In the Thick, who helped me produce this. Thank you, Harsha. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So like I said, it's reconciling the fact that, yes, we are resilient, but we're still challenging the systemic barriers that block us. So it's not just about will. This is not a Jared Kushner moment where it's like, if you just want to be successful, right, Latinos and Blacks just like pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Way more.
I've run out of bootstraps. I have no more bootstraps. I'm 51 years old. No bootstraps. I'll use them all.
I saw this viral video the other day. I don't know if you both saw it. It was in Kansas City. It was a police commissioner meeting where this young Black woman goes in and she just, oh my gosh, she read them for filth. She's like, I'm not here to be respectable. And what I love about this new generation is that they're using social media, amplifying their voices in an unfiltered way. They are re-educating, right? Unlearning things, challenging the status quo. In the Latinx community, we are challenging the racism that exists within our communities, right? Because Latino is not a race. And we have to face that within our communities if we're going to move forward and advance. So I think this new generation is doing a great job. But I have to say, let's acknowledge privilege. There are young people who are just trying to survive. They're caught in the school to prison pipeline. They're dealing with street violence. They're not getting an education. And so for them, they're just trying to get by. They may or may not be part of some of these movements that we're talking about, but we can't forget about them either.
Yeah. Melinna.
Wow, I mean, everything that you just said, first of all,
I told you she was going to be great. My Afro Boricua hermana, I told you.
Because it's like, you're taking it from my notes, but I love it because it's really encouraging and validating to feel like we're on the same page, and it feels so nourishing just to hear you talk. So I just want to unpack some of what you said. There's so much richness in that. I love that you brought up this idea that MLK mentioned of two Americas, because that really brings into question this idea of positionality, right? Like, if we're going to talk about American Dream, let's talk about who came up with that, who had access to that. And now, sure, it's great to be idealistic and have a rose-colored glasses on, but something, as you mentioned, about this younger generation really isn't afraid to speak truth to power, to take inventory of what we have and what we don't have and what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. I have to give credit to Alicia Garza because I love that she opens up her podcast with that. Later, don't take no. But so speaking about young people and about this renewed voice to really speak truth to power, to identify the fact that anything that we do, any sort of change that we want to bring about in our personal lives or in our communities really can't be talked about without analysis of systems, of institutions, right? It's not just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What is the way forward for our communities, for Black and Brown communities?
Especially in this, especially in 2020, because like you see, like that's the part, like where is the moving forward in all this?
Right. And beyond the election and beyond.
Because it's so easy to be like, oh, let's talk about what they feel about the president. No. Like, Natasha, how do you push forward in all this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, what happens on November 3rd when you hit the polls, that's just, 10 minutes or a couple hours, depending on where you live, of the fight that is ahead. The fight will continue after November 3rd. And it's a great question. I wish I had all the answers. In many ways, that's why I chose to be a storyteller, so I could spotlight the people who know more. But what I will say is that during COVID-19, we saw the power of self-determination. When government and so many systems around us failed, communities pulled together. And we supported each other. I'm thinking about in Harlem, where the local restaurants were feeding hospital workers. That wasn't their job, but they did that. The teachers who put their lives on the line for their students and who drove to their apartments. My own mother, who's a public school teacher. So, and the fact that Black Latino people, and I say Black Latino because they're Latinos who are Black,
Yes.
were frontline workers, and many times were the first to die, or they worked in industries that were the most impacted. So the fact that we survived this, the way that we pulled together, is the spirit in which we must move forward to build our communities and to say, how will we be self-reliant, but not just self-reliant, how will we take power? We're not asking for power, we're taking it.
Right.
So that means running for office and positioning our young people to run for office. I think of AOC, Tiffany Caban, Ayanna Pressley, Lauren Underwood. These are all examples of young people from our own communities who are able to lead and influence and to shift policy, and who are pushing policymakers who've been in office for decades to actually move their agendas, in some cases in a more progressive way. So it's that self-determination, and it's taking power. And it's kind of like, what do you have to lose? You see how horribly many of these politicians have run things. You're like, well, shit, if you can't do it, I'm going to handle business.
No, I think it's right. And I think one of the things that I'm hearing, and that's where I think I'm trying to connect some of the research to the reality, because I mean, first of all, I'm struck, like I have to mention, I'm out of responsibility as a journalist ever since I saw this data point from the CDC that, the excess deaths from the Latino community that's proportional. Like we are like this year, there've been like, it's like Latinos from 25 to 44. You talk
So
about
too.
essential
That age group, right? Such a
yeah. It's like, hello, millennials, like, and they're dying at a greater rate, excess deaths, right? So when you take that and then you mix it with, I still believe in the American ideal, even though I'm going to reshape it, I still believe in. So there's certain parts of this that I'm kind of like, I get it. I do get this research. So Natasha, where does the optimism? I know we said pushing forward, but is it ingrained because of the resiliency? Because it's like, damn it, I still believe in this country. I'm not going to give up. Is there an ideal here that we are changing? The younger community is, I'm not young anymore. Sorry. I'm like the dad. Younger.
Okay.
I know. I'm like, I got you. It's like every time I'm like, the younger community is like, not young anymore. Gen Xer. Like, we screwed it up. Anyway, is that optimism too? Is it too, I guess the idealism of it all, is that still attainable in your eyes, Natasha?
Absolutely. We have been ideal in some of the darkest moments in this country. And it has always been the young people who have had an imagination that pushes us forward, because they're unburdened by a lot of the disappointments and things that maybe some of the older folks have experienced. So I think the optimism is real. We just cannot use that as an excuse to not address the systemic issues. And so that is the important thing, that we see the optimism and we honor it, that we not just post media and stories about the bad things, right? The ways in which young people are failing, but celebrate those who are achieving, those who have started businesses, those who have built, media empires. And what I like about social media is this sort of democratization of the media space. So you have young people who don't need somebody to give them permission. They're going out and they're building their own platforms. So that should give us hope. But it is important that we not just, applaud the young people, but that we actually position them to win, and that these young people move forward. And like I said, run for office, whether it's city council or the school board, or start businesses, and create opportunities for others. These are things that are possible. And I just want young people to be positioned to succeed. And one thing I will say really quickly is that student loan debt is killing Latinos. It's killing Black people, because there was one study from 2009 that said 31% of Latino students with student debt dropped out of college, right? So that's potential that we've lost, that talent that we've lost, all because of, being, again, positioned to fail, right? And it doesn't mean that those students didn't have the talent. Black college graduates have nearly $25,000 more in student loan debt than the average white graduate who's graduating with a bachelor's degree. Like that, again, it just sets us up to fail in a way that even if you make it through those 4 years, you're spending your efforts trying to pay that off while the next person is, building equity and buying a home. So this is what we mean about not just will, not just optimism, but changing the system so that we actually all can live that American dream.
Melinna, final question for Natasha. But she's my Boricua friend is wicked smart, as they say.
Wicked smart.
I love being here with you guys. Oh, I went to school in Boston, so
there you go. I'm totally like, I don't even like this. This needed to happen. And this was just an excuse to finally get to know you, because I'm like, yes, well, continue,
Melinna. Happen again, and with more.
Oh, absolutely. I'm I'm having Natasha on In the Thick. This is happening. I'm already like, you're coming back on like in a couple months. Anyway,
we'll do it again.
I love that you mentioned this idea of the power of social media, because it is a democratizing tool, right? It allows people to have a platform to share information and share ideas. And I think that we've seen how powerful that has been to organize, especially over the summer, with the Black Lives Matter protests. But I also think that it's right now in real time, we're seeing how powerful of a tool it is in organizing young voters. And, we have battleground states that are always up for grabs. It's never California. It's never here where it's like, okay, we're blue. But you have like Texas, you have Pennsylvania, you have Florida, where some of these states on the maps are now gray. They are now up for grabs. And I think that social media has a lot to do with that. So, and that's because of young people. So I want to know, what role do you think that young voters of colors are going to play in this election, and also shaping policy for the years to come?
Yeah. Well, again, I see young people calling out politicians to be very specific with their policy plans, right? So no more sort of generalized promises that you're making, but how exactly are you going to, reform the police department? Or when you say you're going to support education, what percentage is going to HBCUs, and, what percentage is going to knock off student loan debt? So I think that they're doing a really great job with that. And yeah, I'm seeing influencers who maybe would have sat on the sidelines, or could have, they could talk about their shoes or their fashion or whatever, stepping up and saying, hey, no, I'm voting in this election for the first time. That's a big deal. Like, I will take that. So understanding the power of their influence and the need to enter the political sphere, and to not feel like, oh, that's an adult thing, but like, this actually is something that relies on me. So I'm really happy about that. And yeah, like you said, the tides are changing. These swing states, think about how close Andrew Gillum was to becoming the governor of Florida. Like, a Black man, Stacey Abrams, was this close. She probably was actually the governor of Georgia, but
probably won.
She probably actually won. Right. So we have been shifting the tide. I think young people have been a part of that, by using their influence and using their voices, and just challenging the BS. I think I used to be a teacher, and the thing about young people and children in general, they're super honest. Like, they see your BS like so easily. So I think they too are really challenging the public dialogue. And this is why when we talk about defunding the police, something that many people, it scares them, that phrase, or they think it's too radical. You see young people at the front of that charge explaining actually why they don't think it's that radical, and that's how the younger generation moves us forward, is again by challenging the old and bringing in, a fresh imagination of what we can be.
Yeah, it's a beautiful sense of righteous indignation, right? There's a fearlessness now around negotiating, certain terms and concepts that years ago.
Right. And the thing is, when you add, and when you add the optimism, I mean, I think these are more interconnected than you think. Natasha Alford, this is a debut for you, and I think you crushed it. And I can't wait to have more conversations with you. And I would love to return the favor anytime, because you really helped us in a pinch. And I'm so happy that you said yes, because you added exactly what we needed to hear. So thank you again for being on Latino Rebels Radio Live.
Thank you both so much. And please check out theGrio and check out Afro Latinx Revolution Puerto Rico. It's going to be on thegrio.com. Yeah, I'll be back.
And we're gonna totally like feature it on Latino Rebels. Like I already told you that. So I can't wait to see it. So thanks again, Natasha. Thank you so much for being on. Cuídate, abrazos.
Thanks, Natasha.
So there.
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing? Remember when we were planning this show? We were planning the show, and I was like, I think I have someone who's gonna really knock it out of the park.
Yeah, and we're like, please say yes, please say yes, please say yes,
please say yes. And so, really thankful and grateful that Natasha was so kind. She was super busy today, but she's like, for you guys, I'll give you a couple. And I was like, thank you. But yes, follow theGrio, and yeah, great work. So listen, let's just keep it rolling. Let's just keep this rolling, because now we're gonna bring two guests on, and one of them is a colleague of mine and a friend who we have worked a lot together at Futuro Media. And I'm incredibly proud of her. She's an award-winning senior producer at Futuro Media's Latino. Well, she won at Latino USA. Now she's at Futuro Studios, which is the original programming division of Futuro Media. She's also the co-host of Mike.com's podcast, The Payoff. And she's my favorite Argentine, I guess, in the world, besides Leo Messi. Antonia Cerejido. Is that right for me to say that? Welcome to Latino Rebels Radio Live.
With Leo Messi, like I didn't get higher up than Leo Messi, but I also get it. He is incredible.
Okay, top two. Come on. Come on.
I'll take it. Well, the Pope has been really, shocking people these days.
You're more my favorite Argentine than the Pope. So welcome aboard. Thank you for being on. And then also with us is Layla Zaidane, the executive director of Millennial Action Project. It's an organization focused, there she is, on activating young leaders to bridge the partisan divide. Incredible organization. Hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you. And I have to say, I also love Argentina. I lived there in college. It's where I learned to drink Malbec. It is my favorite place. Very happy to be.
Things are happening. Things are happening. So we're very happy for the.
I just know that we have like a friendly or sometimes not friendly soccer rivalry. And as an actor, I can do a terrible accent, but I'm not going to do it right now.
No, you're going to do it. So Melinna, why don't you start this part of the discussion?
Yeah, so I'm so excited to speak to both of you. Thank you so much for making time to talk with us today. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Antonia, seeing you on Dices and Marrow was like a highlight. And because I'm part of the Bodega Hive, the brand is strong. And you showed up with like an old school vintage coat. And I was like,
oh my God, thank you for calling out my coat.
Listen, for me, it's important. So,
well, Melinna, I'm like overwhelmed by your lipstick. Like in the pandemic, it's so rare and it looks so good. I'm just like, wow, I'm in shock. It looks great.
This is like my, it's a source of strength. And so having it covered up by masks all the time is just like not the biz for me. So I always have to shout out, it's Rihanna Fenty. So, if Riri's trying to like send me some influencer, like right here, gladly wear.
Do you want to get to the? All of a sudden, this is a lipstick conversation.
No, but let me tell you.
No, can we get to the question?
Yeah, we can. But for millennial Latinas, like this is a source of joy and empowerment, and we've also learned to not apologize for self-care. Okay, see,
My bad. You're right. You're absolutely right. I got you.
Realness. Mira, okay. So let's get down to the business. So one thing, let's go back to the survey. One thing that this survey found was that young women of color in particular were most likely to say that gender inequality has been a barrier to their opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that all of us here have experienced that at some point or another in our careers. So I want to know, and this is for both of you, whoever wants to jump in, considering these fears that we might be even going backwards, and now with the new Supreme Court justice that was all of a sudden, like we went to sleep, we woke up, we have a new justice. it seems like we might be going backwards on some key women's issues, especially with regards to reproductive rights. So how are you feeling about the future in terms of that as women of color?
Antonia.
Yeah.
Why don't
Well,
you start?
One thing that I think cannot be emphasized when it comes to the millennial vote is something that they call the Obama effect. I don't know if they talked about this a lot towards the end of Obama's presidency, but I think that millennials, the first person they could vote for in most of their cases was President Obama. And I think that when he was elected, so many people looked around and thought, wait. Why is this like this? Like, I think it was a huge wake-up call. And I think, we had all white guy presidents, and then it blew people's minds.
It's like, whoa.
Of course. Yeah. But then how that impacted you at work, So it's like, oh, why is my boss always a man? Why are men getting all of the promotions? And I think it was true for women too. I think anybody who was not a white man started to ask themselves about every aspect of their life. Mm-hmm. And I think that because of that, the millennial population is very critical of sort of issues of representation, because we were there for the first barrier-breaking presidency in that respect. And I think that they're very aware and they're worried about the future because, we had, as Ta-Nehisi Coates says, the first white president when Donald Trump was elected, in the sense that they were actively choosing a white man who espoused such xenophobic, racist, and misogynist views.
Right.
Yeah.
What about you, Layla?
Yeah, Antonia, I think you make such a good point. And I think what strikes me when thinking about young women and young women of color in particular is that as a generation, we're actually the first generation to have done worse than the generation that came before us. And so it is I think, very top of mind to understand how many of the systemic barriers that are so visible when you are, when you do find yourself in the minority in a room, some of these systemic barriers that are, maybe not noticed by people who are doing just fine. I think there's a fine point put on it, and I think some of those things like the wage gap, right? The healthcare that you mentioned, the reproductive rights and paid family leave, access to childcare. These are all things that are holding us back in lots of different areas of our lives, and they're structural systemic problems. And the other thing that I would probably point to is that I don't think of myself as just a woman or just a person of color. There's an intersectionality, and I think that carries over into how we approach our lives, how we approach our friendships, our families, our work. And it, again, kind of this systemic issue. Now we see it in our workplace, in our school, in our families, in the way that we move about the world. And I think that for this generation, both the compounding of, wow, we've actually done worse than the generation before us, and hey, I'm really noticing a lot of systemic issues that are, as a woman of color, really holding me back and barriers to my opportunity. I think those two things are almost like a perfect storm in this moment that are really underlined for this particular cohort.
Yeah, no.
I'm so glad you brought up intersectionality, because I think that in this moment, it's really important to, again, return to this idea of positionality, take inventory of how we walk in the world and how we're perceived and what privileges and what oppressions we bring to the table in any space that we enter. You can't separate your identity as a woman from a woman of color, and one is not more salient. And I think that you're right, Antonia, you bringing up this idea that Gen Z and millennials really started kind of coming of age, or at least gaining some sort of political awakening, political consciousness, when the antiquated ideas that this administration has ushered in were not the norm. And so it seems like intensely regressive and even heavier.
Right. And I think the biggest point from this research that kind of crystallizes it is the environment in a lot of ways. Like 43% of the respondents think that, it's going to be worse. And issues of climate change, which were kind of seen as like hippy dippy topics. Come on. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, Earth Day, like we're so bad. You know what I mean? It's like recycling, but what you're seeing is this concern, and there seems to be a clear dichotomy in this country where all of a sudden climate change, which was seen as this maybe extreme radical idea, is now becoming a concrete voter issue. Layla, like, can you speak to that? Because I do think that's another underreported story in the 2020 that kind of has lost a little bit of attention, obviously, because, we're in the middle of a pandemic. There's a racial reckoning and all this. But what are your thoughts about sort of how these generations are looking at the environment as sort of a mobilizing issue?
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about it is you're right. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There's an economic crisis. The third one, by the way, that this generation has had to live through. And still this issue of the environment is in our top tier level of issues that we want solved. And in fact, I would go so far as to say it might be the generational issue, of millennials. And just to bring it back to this idea of intersectionality, I think there's, climate is not just the weather, right? There's the racial impact of who gets clean water, and there's so much of how we see now climate factoring into our lives. It has truly become one of the most important things that this generation sees as something that we want to solve. And, I'll pick up too on this idea of it used to be really hippy dippy. It was something that certainly just the Democrats were talking about. And now, at least among millennials, you see this is an issue that, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you can't drink your water, like the water doesn't care. And you're seeing more conservative young people also ask for immediate action on things like the environment, things like climate. And it's something that, we just can't keep kicking the can on this problem.
Yeah. How about you, Antonia?
Have you all seen the documentary Boys State about?
Oh, yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah. Let's take a moment. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought was so interesting about that movie was that they're very partisan as the conservative teen boys versus the sort of more liberal teen boys. But and it's like very strange to see high school boys talking about abortion so with so much opinion. But both the conservative and liberal kids were really concerned about the environment. And I thought that was a very telling thing.
It was almost like a baseline. It was almost like you're absolutely right. Totally. It was like a baseline, like, why would you not talk about the climate?
Right. And I think, so that was, for me, it was sort of startling to see that. That was the one issue that really felt bipartisan, even for these young men. But I also think one of the things that does sort of concern me is that now that it does seem that there is more pressure on corporations and oil companies to take more responsibility for the environment, I do worry that the same people who sort of got us into this problem are now going to set themselves up to be the heroes. And in doing so, doing it in a way that still perpetuates social injustices and racial inequality. And I think that is going to be an incredibly important thing for people to watch going forward, because if it is a concern for the whole country, that's wonderful. But how climate change gets addressed is a huge issue.
Right. But, I love that you're both of you are bringing up this idea of young people. I would say even more so, specifically Gen Z, maybe some younger millennials, whether or not they skew to the left or to the right or somewhere in the middle, are overall concerned about the environment. And it's just kind of like this consensus, right? This common knowledge that we have to be concerned when glaciers are melting. We have to be concerned with wildfires, et cetera. It's just kind of like, how are we going to live? By that same token of this idea of bipartisan concern, I also think that, and I want to hear your ideas about this, your thoughts on this. There's also this bipartisan kind of backing for certain actions and certain practices that continue to stand in the way of actual climate progress, if you will. So I would say that both Republicans and Democrats seem to be pretty heavily rallying around fracking. Like, I didn't know that was a flex. I didn't know that Democrats would be like, we're not going to cancel fracking. Like, okay, did you mean to say that with such gusto? And so, you know, it still seems like we haven't turned the corner with some
the fracking flex.
Yeah,
I mean, Layla,
I don't think it's
Layla, why don't you? Because you know, where do people view that the partisan divide? Because I feel like that's, I think our generation, like those younger generations, are kind of seeing that there really isn't. There's still not a lot of differences. What are your thoughts in the work that you do?
Yeah, totally. I think you hit the nail on the head. I saw a tweet after, I guess, was it the first debate? And it was just like, but also we could get rid of fracking. Like, people were legitimately like, I'm confused. And I think that shows, you know, even no matter the party, right? Like, there is a push from younger generations to do the right thing that is going to have the long-term impact, that is going to change the perpetuation of these really damaging policies. And it's not necessarily a left-right thing. It's people who are more entrenched in the status quo and who are slower to demand real radical change. And at this point, especially on the issue of climate, what we need is radical change. We can't do incremental shifts. That's just not going to work. And I think that there's a lot of actually really innovative, helpful things that we could do that do have bipartisan support. Things like building our energy resiliency so that superstorms, right, like Hurricane Harvey, Irma, Maria, things that were devastating in particular to communities of color. How can we build our energy resiliency so that the grid doesn't go out and people don't have power for months and can't eat and can't, keep themselves warm? And I think there are things that younger people are being innovative around that are just still not even at some of these older Democrat and Republicans' radars.
Yeah, so I have the last final question here because, and it's not provocative at all, because you know me, I'm just very, straight middle of the road, right, Antonia? You know me too well, but it really has to do with the slide about racial. I know, right? Racial inequality. Because see if our director Andy can pull this slide up while I talk about it. Racial inequality is a top issue for Black millennials and Gen Zers, right? If you look at it, and it says 44, 50, 60%, then it dips down for Latinx, Asian respondents, and so it's around 40%, but only like 26% of Latinos say it's an extremely big problem for me. Antonia, do you want to get into sort of what I think has been one of the more undercurrent themes in younger generations about identity and race and Latinos, and how this slide doesn't surprise me in a lot of ways in terms of what racial inequality is not a top issue.
Jeez.
So what are your thoughts, Antonia, looking at a slide like this? And because we've talked about this in the past, like this is like a Latino USA conversation, like we do at Futuro Media all the time. So I would love to hear your thoughts, and then Layla.
Well, I mean, obviously here they're using the word Hispanic, but like the Latinx community, as has been mentioned before, I think by Natasha, and is a conversation that's happening a lot, is a multiracial community. And so, of course, white Latinos are not going to care as much as Afro-Latinos or indigenous identifying people. So I think that you see that. And I do think you're seeing already, Julio, something you and I have talked about for years now is sort of the deracial.
That's why I asked you this.
Yeah, of course, the assimilation aspect of the Latino community. Is it going to happen more in line of like what happened with Italian Americans? You look at that community now. They used to be incredibly, they were considered a true minority in this country, and now they're not. So I think you're seeing definitely large parts of the Latinx community, assimilating. I think that's happening in a very real way.
like a quest for American whiteness is what I say. Layla, do you have any thoughts?
People, no, sorry, just last thing is that a lot of, I have a lot of friends, including, who used to call themselves people of color and who now don't in the last month. And that's because they've had to face their own privilege, including myself, to be totally honest. And, my whole, so I think that the conversation is happening. And I think that it's even in those people who are now seeing themselves as white in a way that they didn't, that doesn't change the issues of social inequality. Just because you don't identify as a person of color, that doesn't mean that's not still a fight that you should care about.
Right.
Right. And so Layla, what about you in terms of, have you heard young talking about this? Because I do feel like it's one of those, I mean, every time we publish something on Latino Rebels that gets into this issue, it's like, just run for cover. But, we're survived, but it's an important conversation. I mean, it's an important conversation that I feel very strongly as an editor that has to be out there. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I come at it maybe from two perspectives. One from, our organizational view and two from just being the child of immigrants. And I think a lot of it comes down to framing, right? Like when we talk about who's a good immigrant and who's a bad one, and even allowing ourselves to engage in those kinds of conversations, reinforce to the good immigrants, like I'm a good immigrant and I'm part of this in group. And so I'm also against kind of this out group. And there becomes this reinforced entrenchment within what is seen as the kind of in-group. And I think I know that for my parents, I witnessed that, I witnessed even the conversations. And I think when you have these big existential issues, right? Like what does even racial inequality mean? Like that could mean so many things in so many places. And people who want to feel like they're not in kind of the wrong group, intentionally distance themselves from that. And I think it's on us, as advocates, as leaders in this conversation, to be honest about the language that we use and how we're rejecting certain frameworks in order to truly drill down on what is the actual problem, what are the actual solutions, and how can we broaden the coalition of people thinking about making this their fight and not kind of playing into maybe the opposition's hands.
So Layla and Antonia, this was fun. I love talking to the both of you guys.
Thanks so much for having me.
I know Antonia, but Layla, we're going to have our producers contact you because you just, this was also an audition to get on In the Thick too.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
No, I'm just kidding.
I feel like I could keep talking for 20 more minutes. I thought we were going to have a whole wine thing. Argentina was going to come back.
We can do it. We have some Malbec. Melina's going to pass around her lipstick virtually.
Love the lipstick.
I know.
You hear this?
Thank you so much for being on. Yeah, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. So, Melinna,
Julio,
this is the part where we close. And I want to get your thoughts. First of all, what do you think about all our guests? I mean,
our guests are brilliant and fierce, and I could speak to them for hours. And I really hope that people tune into this if they weren't able to catch it live. I'm excited for them to be able to ask.
We're going to put it on the Insta. I actually think we're going to turn it into a podcast. We're going to put it on the YouTube. We're going to leave it here on Latino Rebels. It's also on Latino USA. It's on Futuro Media. It's on In the Thick. I think our friends at Now This shared a little bit at the time, other groups. So we'll pass it on to theGrio. So yes, I hope people watch it, but continue. What are other thoughts you think, takeaways from this? Yeah. Because when we were talking about the show, we were planning it, and shout out to Andy Vasquez and Harsha Nahata and Luis Luna, who really helped us out. And also the development team at Futuro Media, Jared and Megan for helping us make this happen. It was one of those things that I wanted to connect. You look at the research and then you look at reality and how do they connect? And I think I took some takeaways away that I'm like, okay, I can see why certain young people would say that. Just want to get your thoughts about tonight.
I think, looking at that final question and the final graphic that we saw, it disappoints me, but it doesn't surprise me.
No, I'm not surprised at all.
The Latinx folks, or the Hispanics as they identified them in this study, I hate that term, not gonna lie, didn't really, list being concerned with race and racism as a top priority. And I think that's a privilege. I think that, especially when we're talking about the Latinx community, it is absolutely high time, beyond high time, for us to start unpacking that and to start negotiating and to continue negotiating with, I think we've been doing this with our anti-Blackness, with our anti-indigeneity, with our white supremacy, with our post-colonial mentalities. And I think that, you know, when we talk about the Latinx vote and we look at how Latinx people are polled and surveyed and are kind of continuously deemed this monolith, we talk about the Latinx vote. It's time for us to unpack that. Like, we are a diaspora from Latin America, from the Caribbean, from Central America, from Mexico. And if you go even further back, Black Latinx folks from Africa. So we have to really unpack this and really settle into the, I don't think it's uncomfortable, but I think it's uncomfortable for some, this idea, this reality that Latinidad is not a race. And it's important for us to look into the nuances, to get specific about what we bring to the table, what our positionality is. And so I'm actually hungry for more. I see a study like this and I have 50 questions that come to mind.
One night only. It's not, you know, it's one night only, but we did the one night only thing. But I think there's so many things that you raise that I think are so important. But you got to go forward, right? You dive in, you know, and you dive in knowing that there's going to be you're going to get stung, which I'm fine. It's like you dive into the hornet's nest, you're going to get stung. And,
let's keep asking questions. That's all I want. Let's keep asking questions.
Yeah, keep asking questions.
Forward, you know,
but I do think it's really fascinating. One of the things of this research that really confirmed to me, because having seen this generation, both these generations sort of evolve digitally in how they express themselves and how they look at the news that they read, the media that they consume. They have always seen through things that are not true, like not authentic. Like they just have no time, no patience. It's like, don't come at me with your BS. Like this is the feel. And there's a power in voice, which, if you think about it, when we say your voice matters, they're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, right? You're supposed to be challenging every convention. And to see the research, when I see optimism as challenging what we have been given and what have we, the going through our own trials and tribulations. I'm going to fight back. And I think that's what I get the most out of something like this. So I want to make one last announcement before we say goodbye. Before I thank everyone. First of all, thank you for the Walton Family Foundation for supporting us tonight, and for the research, and for Kristen coming on and really anchoring it. And thank you to everyone at Futuro Media. Thank you, Melinna. It's great to see you. Andy Vasquez, like I said, Harsha Nahata, Luis Luna, Megan Rapp, Jared Lilly, Erica Dilday, La Mera Maria Hinojosa, everyone at Futuro Media. Thank you all, and our community. But I want to just say a little special announcement. You ready? It's not going to be one night only. We're actually going to do something with this. We're going to work it. We're going to workshop it, right?
Yeah.
With 150 out of Warner Media, right? We're going to workshop this.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, we got a lot of opinions, a lot of questions to ask, a lot of things to say over here, a lot of unpacking to do.
So we're going to take all the information that's going to come our way the next couple of months, and then we're going to go and create, and we're hoping, and we feel really good that we're going to create something very special that is going to be long lasting and can have impact. And we want to thank each and every one of you. Remember when we were doing these at 10 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock Pacific during the summer, during the pandemic? And it's all because of you guys. People were asking, where's Latino Rebels Radio Live? Well, we're here one night only, but we'll be back. Melinna, you want to say a special bye-bye? We got a couple of seconds left.
A special bye-bye. I
say
really
bye-bye, Mena.
Being in conversation with you and with all the folks that jump into the comments. Some of you make me really angry. Some of you make me proud, but
All right, we're good. We are out of here. Latino Rebels Radio Live. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Take care of yourselves.
We love you guys.
Ciao. Adios.